Hello, my name is Chris Zagalo, and I've come here today to talk about my book, Running with Rainbows, The Afterlife and Other Stories. This is one of my other stories that includes the subject called astral travel, which to me, many people have inquired about what is astral travel and what does it mean. It's something that we do every night in our sleep, and it can often be called out of body experience, or it can be called soul travel, where we literally leave our body and travel to other places. And sometimes people travel to the same place, which is an interesting thing too. But I have a couple of stories that I can share just to maybe make some of it a little bit clearer. And one of the first times that I experienced astral travel, I had talked about with my grandmother, who had come to me when she was in a coma state in the hospital, and I had woken up from my nap, and she was at the end of my bed, and she said such wonderful things to me and gave me more attention than I'd ever had. And when I ran in to tell my dad that she was in the room with me, he came running in and was upset and took me to the hospital where I could see that she was in a bed. But to this day, I remember her sitting there and talking to me and sharing with me before she passed away. And so there are many times that these kind of things can occur in many lives. And it seems like at especially the end of a life, we can see these things. And at another time, I have had some black cloaked beings come to me and taken me with them. And I'm not sure where they've come from, but they always felt safe to me. And one time they came to me and took me to watch a person that I had just met at a health spa that traveled to their home. And they showed me, and I could feel the night air. They showed me the trip, where the person had been, and what it was at that person's house where they lived. And when I called him and told him what I saw, he said, "Yep, that's all the places I was at, and this is what my house looks like. So yeah, you traveled here." And then another time, the cloaked beings took me to a drug den, and they told me it was Berkeley, and they took me up some stairs. I could feel the steps, and I could smell the room. It was horrible, and I heard the moaning and groaning, and saw the paraphernalia that sat around, and it introduced me to seeing what it was like in a drug life, since I didn't have anything like that in my life. And it has helped me to understand people that are going through this, and families from the whole experience that I had with them, and to help me to study more on mental health and addiction. And another time, the cloaked beings came to me and took me to a little girl. The week before they came to me and told me that they were going to be coming back, and the little girl was going to die. And I talked about that also in one of my videos, that she had, that when she died, they came and got me. I felt the air on my skin. I felt the room. It was just as alive as the other times the cloaked beings had come to me. And then there's little children that often talk to me about the little experiences they have. And so many times the adults in their life kind of poo-poo it and say that they're just making it up. This couldn't be, but it does. Children know these things, and only because they were told that it didn't happen, that they stop it. And I was with one little boy that used to come and spend the night with me once in a while, and he was about 4, and his mom told me that he would have been naughty. And when she said, "Why are you being so naughty?" and he said, "Well, I don't even live here anymore. I live in Paris." And so that night he spent with me, I asked him if he traveled somewhere. Do you go places at nighttime? And he sat there for a little bit, and he kind of looked one way and looked the other way, and then he looked at me and he said, "Yep, yes I do. Yeah, I go." I said, "Most of the time I go to California." I said, "You do? What do you do there?" "Oh, I fly over it." He said, "I've never really been there, but I fly over some really pretty places, and it's very pretty down there." And And I said, well, so where do you go during the, what do you do during the daytime? He said, well, silly, I go in the car like everybody else. And one time when I was on a trip and I walked on top of a volcano that was active underneath, and I sent him a picture of it. And when I talked to him on the phone, he told me that the picture wasn't what it really looked like, that he told me what the real color was. So he also traveled when I was traveling as well. And then another time, a little girl that I knew was a fairy, I saw her behind her mother's back before she was born. I knew she was going to be a fairy and that she was going to be kind of different. And she was. She talked more adult-like, and she just had a different way about her that she was when she was little. The way she talked, and she didn't talk right away, but she did her own kind of sign language. And she was just her own person. And one day when she was 4, she was back in my car in her little seat that the children sit in. And there was a man across the street from my house that was in a hospital bed in the front window. And she said, you know, that man over there is very sick. And I said, yes, he is. She said, well, we could heal him if you want. And I said, what? We can do what? And I'm driving thinking, oh, look at my rearview mirror. Who's in my back seat? She's talking about healing, and she's only 4. She said, she said, I can come get you. She said, did you know that I travel with fairies and that we heal people at nighttime? And I said, no, I didn't know you did that. She said, yeah, and sometimes if it's really bad, we come and get you because sometimes we need an extra help and you can be helpful. And sometimes you don't even know. She says, not like we take your whole body, but we come in through your front door and that other part of your body comes up and you come with us. Oh, I didn't know that. It's, well, you do now. So she said, we can go heal that man tonight if you'd like. And I said, okay. She said, I'll come and get you. I'll show you how. She's 4. And then she said, what? She looked up and she said, never mind. He's going to die tomorrow. And he did. So a couple days later, I had a friend that had a heart attack, a severe heart attack, and was taken airlifted out of town. And I had taken her to the movies with some other children, and she was kind of dancing around a Winnie the Pooh or something. And I brought her over and I said, you know, do you think your fairies could help a friend of mine that had a heart attack? And she immediately stopped what she was doing and she did this look and she said, exactly what is his name? Exactly what town is he in? Exactly what is the name of the hospital? And then she ran off and played. And I heard that he was pretty bad off and that wasn't expected to maybe live. And the next day, she came running over to me in the grocery store and said, well, he's okay now, right? I said, who's okay? She said, the man that we helped. She said, he was really bad. She said, did you know that hospitals late at night, it's dark and spooky and machines beeping everywhere? I said, oh, I guess so, you know. And she said, he was really bad. She said, we worked on him all night long. We don't normally work all night long on somebody, but he was that bad, especially in this part up here. She said, I was more by his feet working. I said, well, how many are there? 11 of us. There's 11 of you? Yeah. And she said, I'm the only one that lives in a house. They all live in the tree outside. And one of the ones that comes with us, it carries the medicine that we use. And she said, you would call it fairy medicine, fairy dust, but it's not that. It's a different kind of medicine that you wouldn't know about. Oh, so she said, so he's better now. I said, well, I've heard that he was. Yeah. So the next day, I saw him in downtown. And I said, well, how are you doing? I hear you're okay now. And he said, did you know that hospitals late at night, it's dark and spooky and beeping machines everywhere? And he said, same thing she said. She said, my doctors told my wife that I would not make it through the night to plan for my funeral. And that I was so bad that they couldn't fix anything. So he said, so I went to sleep. And in the morning, they came in and said that I was healed, that some kind of miracle had happened. And they couldn't say why, what happened, but somehow my body seemed to have fixed itself, that everything that was going on wasn't going on any longer, so they sent me home. So a couple days later, I told him about her and what had happened. And he just, his mouth kind of opened, like, when did she do that? And when did this happen? And I told him the details. And his wife said, well, could you give her a message? I said, sure. Tell her, thank you. So I called her and she said, did you tell him? And I said, yeah, I did. And they said, thank you. And she said, oh, well, just tell him you're welcome. So this is how children, and I think there's more children out there like this than what we know about. She's now an emergency nurse at nighttime. And I hope that she's doing her fairy work. She didn't want to talk about it too much after all that happened. At one time, when she was still talking to me about it, she was about 5, I had breakfast with her and James Van Prague, who's an internationally well-known medium. And he said she was as powerful as anybody he'd ever met for being a healer. So she didn't want to talk about it for different reasons after that. But so I haven't brought it up too much. But she's now a nurse and working at night, so hopefully she's still doing her fairy work. So then another thing that happened with me is that I have a friend that had had a heart attack, and he was in a place where it just happened that paramedics were right next to him, as well as the ambulance. And he had a heart attack, and they did CPR on him, and it broke a couple ribs and one punctured into his lung. So, and then on top of the surgery, they weren't really sure what was going to happen to him. So they put him in a medical-induced coma for 2 weeks so that his body could just rest and they could determine the severity of what happened to him. And during that time, I drove by his house, and I was wondering, I wonder if I could fly in to talk to him. And all of a sudden, I was just there. I had pulled my car over first, obviously. And I was in his coma. And I could see his head and the top of his body, and it was in like a white cloud. And I said, hey, how you doing? And he said, I'm really frightened, Chris. And I said, well, you know what? I said, you're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. As soon as you wake up, I said, you're in a medical-induced coma, and you're doing this so that you can get well. And that your body has time to do a little healing after you've had all this stuff happen to you. And then you're going to be able to come home. So I had been told up until that point that he was going to have 3 months of rehab if he even survived. And then as soon as they woke him up, some different things started happening. And my daughter called me right after that. Mom, yeah? She said, did you do some woo-woo stuff with your friend? What do you mean? Me? She said, his daughter just called. And when he woke up, he couldn't understand why you weren't standing there, that you had just been there. So did you go there? It was like a 5-hour drive over a mountain. No, I didn't. No, I wasn't there. She said, well, they all think that you must have been there while he was in this coma because he just could not understand why you weren't there. He thought maybe you were in the hallway. He just knew that you were somewhere. And they just couldn't understand why I didn't appear. So this is kind of what happened. And I saw him. He did come home right after that. About a week later, I saw him downtown, and he just looked at me, and he's somewhat of a skeptic, and he went, Chris, no talk, no talk. So I didn't say anything to him about it, and he just didn't want to know, I guess, at that time. And so several months later, I did see him and tell him what happened. And apparently he said, yes, he remembered my coming in and talking to him. And that the thing that was interesting is that through the day after he woke up, my brother was walking around in his room. And my brother had passed away quite a bit of time before this. So he was a skeptic, but he was obviously sees somebody that was from the other side. So it was a new experience for him, and he's alive and doing well. And it's just that there are so many things, mystical things that go on in this world while we're busy doing something else. So I just wanted to bring this attention to everyone today, and to know that there are so many things that are going on. If children are talking about things that they can see, don't shut them up about it. Allow them to be in their creativity. If it's imagination, then that's fine too, but maybe it's real. So I will talk to you again another time. Right now, I'm going to go downtown, like I often do at the end of my videos, and I'm going to have a latte. And when I go down, I sit in the plaza and I open up my heart to everyone I see. There we go. And I spread love and light, and oftentimes, and I smile, and people come up to me and say, I like your hat, I like the way you look, and you have a nice smile, and you have a good day. And so I'm asking all of you to do the same thing. Go downtown, smile, open up your heart, send love and light to everyone and everything that you meet. And until then, I will see you next time. Okay, bye-bye.